Yes.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. You'll have to pay me a lot.
They're out having barbecues
I'm sure
and
it
stuff
has
here.
something.
I sent you an email.
We'll share my opinion.
Yeah, we'll go with them.
I didn't know until
Okay.
Is it the finals? Who's in it?
Tonight, tomorrow night, yeah.
Who's dancing?
Hey, look, after this Kim
Go.
He never watches it.
You don't?
He never watches it. He just says that he watches it.
Oh.
Paul, do you want to speak?
To the fact that we are also going to have a work session. So just before we get started, I just wanted to make a note that we are going to move item 5 and 5A before item 4, so we can get all of the Planning Commission business out of the way and spend all of our time concentrating on our work with the Natural Resources Committee. So just in case anybody was just dying to hear those minutes, we're going to get those over really quickly. So,
Oh, boy.
oh boy, yeah. So unfortunately, as I was finishing up washing the dishes, there was some very distressing news, and I'm assuming that everybody has hearts and thoughts are with the people of Manchester, England tonight. It's just very sad. So we will now move on, and things just happen. So on our agenda tonight, we have a public hearing, and it is proposed amendments to the Oregon City Municipal Code, and it's dealing with supplemental zoning regulations and exceptions in Chapter 1754.010. And Chapter 17, for those of you that don't know, that is our Bible. We use that a lot. And we are also going to be dealing with definitions as defined in Chapter 1704.743, Site Plan and Design Review, also in Chapter 1762, and also dealing with hooved animals in Chapter 6.07. And I can just see everybody's eyebrows going up. Hooved animals, oh. Anyhow, yes, I'm just kind of going over what we're going to be doing. So we also have on our agenda tonight, besides the work session and the public hearing, we have a spot on our agenda for public comments for items that are not on the agenda. Is there anyone here who would like to tell us something that we need to know or don't need to know, or anything that you'd like to talk to us about at all? We would be happy to entertain your comments. So everybody's here for item 3A and item 4A? Yes?
Talk about the weather.
Okay, all right, well then we will move on. So since I've already kind of announced what that is, we are going to be having a public hearing. And if any of you are interested in testifying again or for the first time, please, as Pete said, please fill out one of the handy comment forms at the back of the room and hand those to Pete or to Trevor, and we will get you right up here to talk to the Planning Commission. And since this is a legislative hearing, we do not have to go through the spiel. But bear in mind that public hearing procedures are still in effect. We will have a staff report. We will open the public hearing. We will hear public testimony. There is no applicant or opposition. We will really be delighted to hear from you tonight. And then we will have probably questions of staff. And then we will close the public hearing and we will deliberate, and Laura or Pete or Trevor will announce when this is going up to be reviewed by the City Commission. So you have all of those dates in your handy dandy calendars. And then we will deliberate and vote and move that forward or backwards or whichever way it's going to go. I don't predict what these guys are going to do. So with that, I would be happy to entertain the staff doing the report.
Great. Dim these lights.
Yeah. Let me see if it'll go dimmer. That's the setting we normally use.
Okay.
No, that's it.
Sure. All right. Hello, my name is Trevor Martin, planner with the Oregon City Planning Division, and tonight I am going to be talking to you about some amendments to the Oregon City Municipal Code, specifically relating to accessory buildings or accessory structures. So, yeah, that's what we were trying to do, but it wasn't really responding all that well. Oh, there it goes.
You have to just massage every light but the ones.
Yeah.
Who's got the popcorn?
That's our setting, but that light number 3 is what it's set on, and it's not.
It's not responding.
Okay, no.
It used to be rather bright right there. So,
New bulb.
It's a spotlight on you.
maybe there's a.
It's a natural resource.
I think you'll just do the best that you can.
Yeah.
That's all we can do.
Look at that.
We have no control over this.
I found a new button.
All right.
It's a little too dark. It's all right. How's that?
Yeah.
All right, we'll roll with it. Don't worry.
Yeah, we'll go with it. I'm sorry if some of the images are washed out. So, again, we're talking about more or less accessory buildings and accessory structures and how they relate to Chapter 17 of the Oregon City Municipal Code. So, kind of jumping into a little bit of background, and again, I'm sorry if you can't really read this. So, the reason this is kind of coming up is there were some concerns from the public that were addressed to City Commission. City Commission, talked with themselves and kind of determined that it would be a good idea to revisit this subject and send it to the planning division to take a look at to see what they can do to maybe lift some of the regulations surrounding accessory structures and buildings within Oregon City. Specifically looking at maybe metal buildings is what they're kind of more or less looking at. So the planning division has done some public outreach and work sessions, gone to CIC, the Community Development Stakeholders Group, and Planning Commission just a little while ago to kind of work through some of these items and what they're all about. So I'm keeping it really simple on the presentation. I don't want to read the code to you, but we can go through it a little bit deeper if you want. So the main items that we'll be looking at is adding some new definitions. So some of those new definitions would include cargo containers, temporary structures, defining what a mobile vendor is, and expanding the definition of accessory building and accessory structure. Removing the phrase tension metal from the current definition of membrane structure. Adding a section for temporary structures, and deleting the section for seasonal sales. The reason for that is seasonal sales kind of gets into what they're selling and more or less the business, what type of business it is, more than the use of the property. So we went the other direction with that. And then the placing of cargo containers. So we'll get into that. And so Laura created this a little while ago, and I thought it was great, and I liked it, so I wanted to reuse it. So getting into temporary structures. So we're looking at the whole idea behind this is to allow items such as like the carport structures, like the more typical metal or aluminum carport structure that you might buy. And permitting those within reason. So permitting those is we're still going to have design criteria, still have to place it behind the home, still can't be in front of the home, still has to fit in with some existing regulations. So the difference, I believe, between these two is that this one would be visible from the street, whereas this one would be more or less behind the home. So that's kind of the difference there. This one is not permitted because the city is still taking the stance that having a tarp kind of around a rigid frame is still not what we're looking for. We would rather have the metal or the steel carport structure than maybe a tarp around a frame. A tarp or a cover over an RV or over a boat, that's still going to be allowed. That's still something that we're fine with. And then we would be getting rid of or prohibiting cargo containers in residential areas. We just don't think that those fit and make a lot of sense within a residential district. And then, of course, like the backyard pavilion, and then a tent is fine. So, and then the next thing that we'd be looking at here would be looking at temporary sales, or temporary structures, I'm sorry. So we're talking about accessory structures that apply to residential. Now we're moving to temporary structures that apply to commercial. And here we're more or less looking at how to address what, say, like a Fred Meyer or like a grocery outlet would want to do with their seasonal tent sales and those kind of items. So we put together a list of criteria that would be better, that the city could have as a tool to use to, I guess, be more helpful with the businesses and kind of develop a time and a schedule of when these structures could be up. So for like weekend sales, or if they're having like a special event, or when they're selling Christmas trees, to kind of come up with a better style of placing those structures. That way, they're just not up and down. And I know that it's perceived as maybe one party's getting special treatment, the other party's not being treated fairly. So we're just taking some steps here to try and reduce some of that feeling. So that's those items in a nutshell.
So you put these up to show approved or not approved, or just
They would be acceptable. These are the kind of structures that we'd be looking at. Yeah, so like the weekend tent sale or
4th of July sales,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah, that's what we would be looking at.
The July sales were already regulated.
And then, so those would be the main things, and then those would be the main items we'd be looking at. And then again, quickly, we'll be looking at prohibiting cargo containers in residential areas, and then moving the hooved animals section to a chapter appropriate for hooved animals, and kind of getting it out of the accessory structure section of the code. And then basically just cleaning up some of the overall code in general, making it more, I guess, in a list format. That way it's easier to read, and you're not having to read through a paragraph spliced together. Just make it easier for everybody in general. So those would be the major changes.
Question, Trevor?
Yes.
On these construction drop boxes, are they allowed for demolition and things like that? They have to get some sort of permit from the city, and they're usually not permanent. They're, once the job is complete, they haul them away and take them to the dump. Those are allowable, are they not?
I believe those would be like the contractors units. Or,
Yeah, they're not included in this category.
No.
So there's two things. There's the commercial, there's residential requirements, and then there's the commercial requirements. When we do a land use approval of something like that, it allows a time for the temporary construction office on the commercial side, and then things like dumpsters as well. For a lot of those pods or dumpsters that happen, you can get a right-of-way permit and put it in the right-of-way. That's about the only permitting there is for those structures,
For dumpsters.
for dumpsters.
Yeah, and that has a lot to
pods.
do with the fact that some of them cause site obstructions, or they could be too close to a corner, or something to that effect. And I'm glad that the city does require a permit for those, because I had a situation,
In the right-of-way.
in the right of way, where somebody parked it right by a place where if you were going to pull out, you would never be able to see in your life. It was very hazardous, and that got taken care of.
Mhm.
The best place, obviously, is to put them in your own property, and that way you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, so what we did in those proposed code changes is we now have an avenue for temporary structures on commercial properties that we never had before. So we're legitimizing these temporary structures in a way that doesn't exist currently. And then also those minor tweaks to the residential side of things that would allow metal buildings and then reduce the corner setback.
So on the commercial ones, did I miss it in here somewhere about how long they can be up? Did I see that somewhere?
So there is a time frame in here. It should be on page 7.
7.
Of the May 19th draft.
There's 7.
Yeah, 7. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. You have 2 drafts there. One of them is May 17th, and then one of them was revised May 19th. And the one that's revised May 19th, the main change there is the definition on the first page of
So I
accessory
see
building.
2 times per year, but I'm thinking of a place I see that people sit outside and drink, and I've noticed that they've had a tent up. Is that permitted then now? You know what I'm talking about?
Right
It's
now,
still saying that.
no. It's
So right now, we don't allow temporary structures through commercial. You go through the full site plan design review. A structure is a structure. We don't distinguish between temporary or permanent. So
Okay.
unless someone's gone through site plan design review, it's not allowed. Right?
Okay.
They didn't get a permit. They didn't ask for a permit. In this, we do have a temporary structures code. The time that those temporary structures can occur on commercial properties depends, right? Typical answer. So for structures up to 200 square feet, you can have 6 times a year for 3 consecutive days in a row. So you could think weekend sale at a grocery store or something like that. And that's for these smaller 200 square foot structures. For structures larger than that, you get 2 times a year for a large structure.
And not more
And-
than 30 consecutive days.
Well, not
depends on
exactly.
the
Okay,
size.
I just
If
saw that
you're
now.
up to 800 square feet, you can get up to 30 consecutive days. If you are larger than 800, then it's just a week. So think, I don't know, a mega wedding tent or something like that. Really, really big, shorter amount of time. Smaller, longer amount of time. But the 30 days would come in for fireworks sales, Christmas tree sales, things like that. So Trevor identified that we took out that you can only sell fireworks from X date to X date, which was in our code.
Yeah, that's because that was a state law.
Because it's state law. And what we want to do is regulate the buildings themselves, not really that part of it, but the state law. Re-regulate zoning as far as uses are concerned, and really figuring out exactly which day the fireworks get sold was a little bit detailed for our code, but we did want to regulate these temporary structures because we didn't have an avenue for them to be legitimate before, except for our full site plan design review process, which nobody was going through.
Have you heard any complaints? I'm thinking of specifically of a place on Washington Avenue that has a tent up. Have you heard any complaints about this being too restrictive on a business? Have you received anything about that, or is just nothing's been said?
Trevor could talk about, we did go to our community development stakeholders group, which is comprised of businesses as well as someone from the CIC shows up, and developers and things like that, and Trevor could tell you
Good.
about what their
Yeah,
comments were.
I have no personal.
Oh, go ahead.
I have no personal connection. Just was wondering because I've seen that a lot.
Yes, within the stakeholders group, they seemed pretty favorable about the timelines.
Okay.
They didn't really have any major complaints about it. They more or less talked about what an appropriate square foot size was instead of maybe more or less the timelines. So they're just kind of like looking at what those appropriate, I guess, thresholds would be for each category was what more or less what they were looking at.
However, when we did have a work session with the planning commission before, the timelines were originally longer, and it was upon their recommendation that they got shortened.
There being the planning commission.
It was the community development stakeholders
Community
group who said
development,
that's
okay.
too long.
Really? Okay.
It was, yeah. But the one that you're talking about was 2,000 square feet, if that gives you a
I
frame
have
of
no
reference.
idea, but
So that would be up to a week for a maximum
oh
time.
really? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We could just get some umbrellas. So the reason that the statute in our code was from the state was that we wanted to be in sync, and at the time it was advised by our then city attorney that we match what the state had, so there would be no confusion, because people don't go look up state regulations except for people who are selling fireworks. So we had the same time frame, not regulating the structure, but you may sell them from X to X, and they had to get a permit from the fire department, yada yada, in the state, all that. That's why it was in there. Being perfectly clear. Mr. Maybe.
Yeah, and I know this was something that was in the old code, but I just saw it. It's one of those where when you have 8,000 words in front of you, suddenly some of them jump out. And I was just noticing the bit about swimming pools, and that a swimming pool, an above the ground swimming pool, is required to have a fence around it or an electronic cover.
Yep,
That's
So
that's state
that's
law
part
too.
of the building code.
Yes.
So how, but my question is, this doesn't regulate the size of the swimming pool. So if I go to Bi-Mart and buy a kiddie pool that's, I can reach around, I gotta put a 4-foot fence around it? I mean, there's no minimum size here, and with the inflatable pools that they have now, and the ones that have like the rubber sides that you just,
Costco type.
He could fall.
I mean,
it just seems to me that there needs to be, a pool above X amount of gallons.
A fence around
Or-
your backyard that the kiddie pool is in will suffice.
I don't have a fence that encloses my whole yard.
Well, I'm just saying.
So I'm not going to put a fence up just so I can stay cool. I mean,
Simmer down as they
You
No,
say.
could
I'm just-
suggest
Settle down.
removing that last sentence that talks about the regulation, since it is in the building code.
well,
You could just refer to C section blah blah blah.
no, I absolutely hate that. I don't want to
Well, hate's
look
a
in
very
one
strong
thing.
word.
No, and exactly the word I'm using. I don't like going flippity flip, refer to this, flippity flip, refer to. So I like that it's here. I'm just amazed at it that is there any minimal size for the swimming pool?
What number is that?
A wading pool.
7.
So we're looking at the top of page 3.
Number
for the
7.
amended
Yes.
draft.
Number 7 up there.
So 1754, 10, 7, whatever.
I see your point.
I mean, I have no problem, especially an in-the-ground pool. It's an attractive nuisance, and there's all that stuff. But at what size is an above-the-ground pool? I mean, at this point,
I'm waiting
Do you
pools.
want
You know,
to
waiting
put
for-
something in about the size?
well, but I don't know what the various sizes are of pools, so I don't know what would be appropriate.
So if I may butt in for just a
Yeah.
second, I know that a lot of this comes out of the building code, and that the building code does go more in depth with this whole swimming pools thing. And I know this is more or less just planning and zoning reference.
Could you look that up, since we've got the city code right there?
It's a building code, it's
Right.
not,
It's in the state building code, or it's in our building code?
we are the state building code, we administer the state's building code.
Oregon
So,
City does.
yeah.
But it's not gonna be in this book.
But so it's not in our book.
In the uniform building code.
The one thing that I could offer is it says a pool must be surrounded by a fence no less than 4 feet in height or a suitable alternative as a locked or electric cover approved by the building official. So there is leeway in the building official there. So if the building official doesn't think that a 3-foot kiddie pool needs a fence around it, there is.
But that makes you go
Okay,
back to the
but then you're into subjective standards, and if he gets mad at my, that's what we're here for.
I
I'm
understand.
sorry.
No, don't
I
apologize.
agree with
Don't
If he
apologize.
gets mad at my 4-foot by 20-foot pool, but he's okay with my neighbor's pool that I bought at the same time, we bought together, but 2 different building officials look at each one, and I get a fine and he doesn't. We don't want that. We want clear and
Yeah.
objective standards, so.
I understand where you're coming from. So I think my point in that was that it's administered by the building official. The city has one building official, and that building official is accountable to the state. So in Oregon City, we administer the state's building program. And so that's why we use their code, and we don't have our own building code and our municipal code. And so there is a chain of command in a way to appeal things, but there is only one building official in Oregon City, and there's definitely a process to challenge those requirements. So without knowing exactly what the square footages are or the details, or without reading the building code, I can't have comfort in saying that the building official, his job is to regulate the building code and to do that in a very
Right.
even way.
Mhm.
And so this would be just another requirement that they would
Well-
enforce these building codes like they do all the other ones.
Does
So,
this even go in
um,
here?
And-
if
and
it's
then-
uneven, there's a way to challenge the building official.
And then the other element of that question is, if I have these temporary inflatable pools, do I need a permit to put it up?
That, we wouldn't include that in our planning code.
Why is swimming pools in here at all when it says about accessory structures and membrane and?
Yeah, so the title of the section is,
Accessory structures and uses.
and uses, so the uses do include other things that aren't structures. So the swimming pool section talks about the setbacks of swimming pools and meeting the front yards
The other thing that
requirements.
I don't see covered in this, since it is part of that item, is play structures,
Yeah.
which can be quite massive, but
Yes.
they're not covered under an accessory
they are
structure or
structures.
use. I mean, they're just as much an attractive nuisance or
A danger to.
a structure as a swimming pool would be. So, do we have anything covering how the building code would cover a play structure? I mean, some of these are, 6x6 cross beams and, 4 swings and rope walks and.
So there's 2 things. One is the planning requirements, and the second are the building code requirements. So the building code does have its own requirements for structures. Planning, so we're sort of dipping our toe into that, which I'm very hesitant for the planning commission
Well,
to do.
I just want to know, I mean, if we're going to cover one thing in our rule, why aren't we covering the other thing?
We do, because we have a definition of structure, which basically is a very permissive definition. So
Definition.
play structures could fall under our definition of structures, which would then be an accessory building. So we are regulating it. We're just not specifying what a play structure is versus a shed structure versus a.
Swimming pool, which is a play structure.
Yeah, so we have a definition of structure, and if it falls under our structure, then it falls under that accessory building code for residential.
Then why is swimming pool in there if we already
It's
have a
not, to me,
definition of
it's not a.
structure?
Laura.
Because it has different setbacks.
Okay,
One at a time.
Yeah.
all
One
right.
at a time.
You got me on that. That's good.
Shall we
Different
take a number
setbacks.
here, Madam
Yeah.
Chairman?
Yes, sir. I was going to ask you, do you have this could you take a minute and think about what might be an acceptable amendment or something to change that you would find preferable?
I would,
Just
swimming
think
pools
about it,
and
and then we'll
out-
move to Bob.
Swimming pools and
We'll come-
outdoor
we'll come back to you.
structures,
Sir.
are under the building
Are
code.
we sure? Me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Laura, isn't a structure defined as anything that needs a foundation? Now, a
That's what I was
swimming pool
thinking.
is temporary, obviously, that you can carry in by hand and use on the weekend. That's not gonna be covered in this thing. I mean, that's getting beyond the pale, you know? So we're talking about here structures that require foundations that are by definition gonna be permanent. And that's what the building instructor or building inspectors are gonna be concerned with.
I'll read you our definition of
necessarily.
structure and planning, which is separate from the building code and their definitions of structures. So again, they have their own regulations for what needs a permit or not. It's not the foundation. There is a separate permit under that. Carrie can read the definition of structure for you.
Structure means anything constructed or erected that requires location on the ground or attached to something having location on the ground. So it's attached to the ground.
Yep.
Pools are.
Yes, they
What, by
are.
pegs?
Located on
A
the
wedding
ground.
pool is
Located
attached
on-
to the ground?
So it's
No,
Like
literally
ten- like
a
ten
lot of
feet.
things.
Where do we have the word foundation in there? That, to me,
Word
that's-
foundation doesn't appear.
Not, doesn't appear,
And why?
because not everything is as a structure
Not
has to have
everything
a
has a foundation.
Yeah, my shed doesn't have a foundation under it, it's just
And
on
it's-
a level piece of ground.
And it's still a structure.
Yeah, my tough shed's just on a,
Interesting that I've read
Great.
through a lot of HOA rules in the last few years, and they talk about structures, play structures in the backyard, but they don't address pools, because those structures are over and above fence lines, and that bothers some neighbors to have some of those huge things, but nothing about pools in our HOA rules.
well, I guess what I would say
even
is,
thought about
I
it.
don't, it just, you know, one of those, like I said, just suddenly words just jump out at you. I'm not gonna put a kibosh on this about it by any means. It clearly hasn't been a problem, or you would have been having a lots of complaints about it. So, I'm just gonna let it roll because it's a wheel that isn't even squeaking, much less broken. So, I was just curious why we were addressing it and not other, and you said setback, so, good. You win, congratulations. Not that it's a battle by any
Good,
means.
it's not a
but-
Team,
contest.
right?
Yes, so,
Good.
thank you for explaining that, and hopefully we won't have any issues with swimming pools, except that
So you have your
they're not deep
structures,
enough when it's
and
too
do you
hot.
have anything?
No, I think it's,
We're not in deliberation yet, so just.
it's not gonna be the final solution that's gonna last for the next 5 or 10 years, probably even 2 years. But it's probably more user-friendly than the old one. And what we got from the work session, most of those people were happy with it because it allowed them to do some things within the limits of this. So I'm pretty happy with it.
You can tell us that, Dilbert. So I have a question, Trevor, about an item on page 7, I believe, and I may have brought this up before. Let me find page 7. So on page 7, item under 1762.050.A.23, we have item C. And if he is cranky about the pools, I would like to know why government-owned properties are exempt from all of the sections of this, because what's good for the public is good for the government. And I have said many times that I think that the local governments, whoever they be, state, federal, they should be held to a higher standard and set an example. So I don't want to see any cargo containers or other things on government properties or things that other people are not allowed to do either. So why is this in here?
So the reason this is in here is for really one item, and that is the farmers market. So the farmers market, when looking at that, they have they're a weekend event. They have lots of tents. They have lots of items. They're on the county's property. We're looking at a way to, I guess, better facilitate the farmers market event is what we were looking for.
I can round out that answer too, because it's actually that government entities use property differently. For example, the cemetery has a pop-up tent maybe for a funeral or something like that. And if we use this, then they would only get it so many times per year. And parks have tents for events and things like that. So thinking of National Night Out and what other events?
You're looking at the positive things. I'm looking at the unintended consequences for exempting government-owned property. I have no problem if we want to put in an exception for our farmers market. Yes, people are going to have pop-up tents when there's a funeral and it's pouring down rain or it's like 100 million degrees out. I understand that.
Or races, or
I think-
there's a lot of
I
things
think
that
that a
happen.
blanket exemption sends the wrong message to the community. And I really would like to see that rewritten to deal with the things that you are talking about and not make it a blanket for everything. Because that just bothers me. I get the farmer's market, I get the pop-up tents for funerals, I get neighbors' night out. How many times a year do we have neighbors' night out? Once. That's a tent that's up for neighbors' night out. We have the neighborhood garage sales for 3 days. People have pop-up tents all over their yards. The pop-up tents go away. I don't see that constitutes
Would saying are exempt from this section, because it's a C, so it's under
under the-
A3.
Right.
So if we just said from this section, then that gets through the issue of the number of times a year or.
No, because we're in all temporary structures, we're exempting them from lots of different standards. So under F, under each of the sections, you notice that we exempted them from street improvements or from planting another street tree because they're doing some type of development. So there's a lot of exemptions that apply. Parking standards for the square footage of the temporary structure, things like that.
Okay, so if we said
So the
are
intent.
exempt from timeline restrictions, but must meet all other requirements of this section?
See, I wouldn't have
Says that, but in a different way.
Yeah, I wouldn't have any problem if it said that very clearly, because because this to me, I'm looking again as the unintended it just says you're exempt from da-da-da chapter this. That means anything goes. I just think
So
we
it's
need-
copying exactly the exemptions that are in each of the subsections. It's just also adding the exemption from the timelines.
And dimensions.
And
So-
and I still think the other exemptions are not that great either.
So can you clarify for me? Are you saying that government entities, unless we list specific, unless we could think of all the times in which we want to exempt government entities, they should be subject to the same standards?
Yes, they have to get permits just like everybody else. If they build something, construct something, do something,
This doesn't apply to permits, though. This is just the use part of it.
I understand, but I'm saying they use things, the public uses things, the community at large uses things, and why should there be a double standard for one entity versus not another entity?
It's because of how it's used, because you have maybe a structure covering a stage at a weekly music concert,
Laura, you're
or
not
you know,
hearing-
things
you're not-
like
You're
that.
not hearing me. If you have things you want to exempt, then rewrite it so you talk about it in that way. They should be required, like everyone else, to follow the regulations, depending on what the situation is. So if they're exempt from the size regulations, they're exempt from the time regulations, they're exempt from, so can they have, cargo containers, and can you throw a cargo container in the front parking lot here at City Hall? Not you personally, but somebody.
No, because they're all exempt from.
Cargo containers aren't allowed.
Cargo containers are not allowed. They're prohibited.
Okay, so period. So Trevor, repeat for me, please, if you can. What are the things in this chapter that we are exempting local or government agencies, whoever they are, from?
So, as we were, I guess, just talking about, so the main items that we would be looking at would be the farmers market. Again,
Not you specific activities. What types of things are they getting local governments, not local, but governments getting exempted from. So you're saying tents, covers.
Covers, right? So it covers, yeah, mostly covers, or the temporary structures that are permitted, which would be those structures that kind of we went through, made those the pop-up fabric tents.
So
It would include cargo containers.
can I jump in here? This says everybody, not government, everybody is exempt from chapter 1204, 1208, 1752, 1762, 1762 050, except for 1762 050 A23 and 1762 A50 A21, which is the building material standard, which it gets at no
I'm not
cargo
sure which page you're on.
containers.
She's still on 7, I think.
You're still on
aren't you?
7, okay.
Yeah,
So
and then
I
also
moved on.
this section.
And
So-
under B,
So everybody is exempt from the parking requirements. Everybody is exempt from
I'm
the
just-
whole list
I'm
of.
just curious what 1762-050-A23D is.
Yeah, I just noticed that one.
Yeah, I read it, so I don't know what it is either.
Well, it doesn't exist. It's from the old language.
Ah,
Get rid of that.
So the D just needs to go away to make it read the same as the others.
okay, so chapter,
So what government gets from this line C is no size restriction, no time restriction. But everybody else has to meet size and time. That's the only restriction that the public has, or the private has over the public.
The only thing that the government is exempt from is everything else in A23. Right. Everybody else has the same exemptions.
It shouldn't the 1762-58-23 be before accept? Because that's the exception.
well, there's 2 accepts in here. That's, one is exempt and one is accept.
I know, but it
No, it
says,
should be stricken. It's subject to everything except for A21, which is the material standards like cargo containers, which is the same that everybody else has to apply to. So the only thing that
Excuse
should be
me.
struck is the reference to 1762 A50 A23D.
There is no A23.
What is that?
well, that's this section, A23. But shouldn't A23 just come before the accept?
There is no.
There is no A23.
823.
Right here.
right
This
here
is
at the
the
top of the
option.
page,
It's the section we're reading.
the top
But
of
she's
the
saying
page.
there's no A23D because
Oh,
it
I
only
know
goes
that.
to
The
C.
D, we already got the D to go away. But
The
if
23.
we're gonna read the section, the exemptions that everybody else has,
No, because it's saying everyone is exempt from 1762 except for the material standards.
no.
That's not what this says.
Everybody else has to meet,
And
is
this.
exempted except for the timelines and the material standards. And you just copy that for government-owned businesses, and they're exempt from everything except the timelines and the building standards, because of where you have the except.
That's how it reads to me.
You need to move the except to after A23.
It's just the placement, what he's saying is
This
the
has
placement,
A23.
Okay.
it's the placement of the word accept.
Because if just reading this, as you said, you cut and pasted that section down effectively. The D's there, and we're not going to worry about that. That's gone. We agree that. So you just cut and pasted the exceptions for everybody else. Correct?
Yeah,
So would you read it?
Okay.
Read it the way you want it.
It should, to me, read, government-owned properties are exempt from all sections of chapter, I'm just going to 12.4, 12.8, 1752, 1762, and 1762-050-A23, except 1762, blah, blah.
050.8.21.
Well, except for this appears in 050A23.
Right.
So why do we need a reference to 050A23 when this is part of that?
You have this.
Couldn't we
You have the
delete-
reference in all the others. So why would you?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I totally see what you're saying.
Well, the D's gone. As far as I'm concerned,
No,
we need
I
the D's
understand
gone.
that. I understand that. But this is in A23, right? We're reading
yeah.
A23.
Exactly.
But it's C of A23.
Well, but it doesn't. To me, I mean, either A23 is
Applicable or not.
yeah. So is A23 applicable to government agencies?
Mind if we noodle on this while you go through
Yeah.
public testimony?
Yeah, because see, the way I read it with where the except is, it says you get to be exempt from all these chapters, except you don't get to be exempt from these other three things. The except is the comma, you're saying except. Those things look like they're applicable to me, and you're just telling me now that those are not applicable. So it's just,
Before we go to public comment, can I ask a question about this?
Sure.
I was running it by Damon earlier. On the very first page, 17.04, 743, and the one below it, why, if they've got a definition of cargo container down there, why do we under 17.04.743 talk about a metal-sided cargo container even in that area if it belongs down here? Is there a reason for that?
It's just for cross-reference purposes.
Because it says it's a definition of membrane or fabric covered storage, but it has nothing to do with metal cargo, and that's down here.
Right. So cargo containers, the new definition, and then yeah, it's more or less for cross-reference purposes. We just want to make sure that, and we also added metal-sided cargo container as a membrane or fabric covered storage area. That way, it's covered. We make sure it's covered in both the definitions and throughout the language of the code, so that it's clear.
It may sound like we're getting really particular up here, but we're just
yeah.
we're held accountable for making sure
Right.
that all the I's are dotted.
So the problem is that today, our code today, excluding this amendment, says that tension metal is prohibited. That includes cargo containers, and that also includes metal-sided structures.
those things
And
you buy
so,
at HD.
since, what's that?
Those things you can buy at HD, the HD place.
Oh, okay, yes. And so this code amendment will allow metal-sided structures, but we wanted to make sure to continue to prohibit cargo containers or metal-sided cargo containers. So then we need a definition for what a cargo container is.
But if that's in the definition here, I guess that's why I was confused. What was up here? Should that be membrane, cargo, or fabric covered storage up here in the title? So
No, because it falls
Okay.
under our
Just wondering.
It's
definition.
defined
again, I
separately.
don't mean to be particular.
Yeah, no,
just I
great
noticed
question.
that in the beginning.
It's defined separately.
So membranes can be anything.
It can be whatever our definition says. So a membrane or a fabric-covered storage area is a metal-sided cargo container or an area covered by a tarp or fabric
Yeah, I saw
membrane.
that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
And
thanks.
so, yeah, that's why it's a little nuanced is why we took
Okay.
out tensioned metal, because it meant both. And we wanted to continue to prohibit one and allow
Okay.
the other.
So Trevor, I have one more thing for you because I was asked in the grocery store over the weekend.
Okay.
So let's say I get a lot of encounters in the grocery store.
Okay.
Stay out of them.
Let's say that I live, or I know of someone, my friend lives in the Kenema National Register District, and I also have a friend who lives in the McLaughlin Conservation District. Now, for the audience, those are two of our historic districts. Let's say that my friend in Kenema buys a giant motorhome, and they want to cover it. Let's say that my friend in the McLaughlin Conservation District wants to get a cargo container and put it on their property. Or they want to put a metal-sided shed, something or other, on their property. So my understanding is that these things would be otherwise prohibited unless they are authorized by the chapter that deals with the overlay districts.
Right. So the historic 1740 would still apply. Would apply first. So we'd still have to go through that whole shebang before moving into this. So they'd still have to look at the historic chapter beforehand.
And this would be whether the property is designated or not?
Yes,
So it would apply universally throughout the entire district.
within the conservation district, yes.
Okay,
And the
so
historic district.
my friend, if you're watching this tonight, that is the answer to your question.
Yeah.
I told him to watch tonight because I would ask the question
Yes.
and get their question answered. So it has been answered.
Because I think that question was asked during the CIC meeting.
Yes.
I think.
And I asked it during the work session, but I was still asked again
Yes.
in the grocery store over the weekend.
Yes, the historic code still applies. Still have to go through it. Applies to the district.
All right.
Just don't go to the grocery store.
We have to, well, see, I try to go really late, but
Can't you
that's,
go you get that same at the dentist or?
there are people that stop me everywhere. It doesn't matter.
In the intersection?
Well, almost, but yes, I usually, no, I'm not going to say on the record when I go shopping, because then you guys will all show up.
Or not.
Or not, yeah, don't come when I'm going. All right, so we're going to open the public hearing, if we may. I think we've
Beat
talked
this
around
one.
this, so let's see, Doug and Paul, why don't you both come on up?
At the same time.
Sure.
Get a twofer.
We want to get to the work session as soon as possible. You can arm wrestle for whoever goes first. It's my pleasure.
Oh, my name first.
Well, Paul, there you go.
And alphabetically.
Doug has spoken.
Anyway, I haven't been following this at all. I have a question just about greenhouses. Are they included as membrane structures?
Trevor.
So I believe greenhouses are still under membrane structures. I'm not 100% positive on greenhouses. I know they're regulated to the building code. Do you have a little more insight on that?
It depends what your greenhouse is made out of. If it,
Yes.
it is not allowed within public view, for another note is that the code currently prohibits membrane structures, but only in cases where they're viewable from the pedestrian level on the adjacent right-of-way. So if it's tucked back and nobody could see it, it could still be okay. Our definition of a membrane structure is a metal-sided cargo container or an area covered by a tarp or fabric membrane. So if it's that kind, that is either attached to a rigid framework, natural feature, or some other structure that is used for storage, is not intended to include weatherproofing of a vehicle, boat, or individual item by a tarp or other type covering, as long as the covering is attached directly to and covers only the particular item. So if it was like
Clear
the...
plastic?
Yeah, right? So it depends if it is fabric or not.
Fabric.
Fabric or a
So
tarp.
fabric is not allowed.
Glass and plastic, yes.
Clear plastic is fine, glass is fine, wood fine, yeah.
But if it's a tarp, then it's not.
Wouldn't clear plastic be a tarp?
So, I'm sorry, I thought when we were talking about plastic, we're talking like the thick structured plastic, not a fabric.
Like window plastic as opposed to rolls of plastic.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Okay.
so fabric bad, non-fabric, okay.
Okay.
In any case, if it's out of view, it's not of concern.
Out of view from the street, or I know some people who put
Or
them
what
in the
about somebody's
backyard against the
backyard?
fence and everybody can see it from,
Adjacent street, not
Just
neighbor's
by the street.
property,
Adjacent right of way.
okay.
Yeah.
adjacent right of way.
So an alley.
It's an
or
If you were
a-
walking as a person, not if you were on a big, tall
Okay. Cool.
ladder or something,
Or you're on stilts.
yeah.
Can't, if you see it, it's too bad. Does that help?
That's all. for me.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Paul Edgar, Historic District of Kenema. I have been very actively working on homeless issues and temporary structures that would actually, with the Village Coalition and Interfaith Council. And as we talk about these things, it almost falls into this range of temporary structures and the need to address something that's actually going to be potentially habited overnight. And these could be on post and beam, and obviously I was here before the Columbus Day storm, and so when you know that if you got a temporary structure, it needs to have some type of minimal anchoring, and but post and beam allows for affordable types of structures, and I've been working with the Portland State University's architectural department, and they've created some of these pods. These are just little temporary structures, and there's a new housing development that went out in Portland, North Portland, with these and for homeless women.
Not yet.
Well, coming
not
close.
they're proposing it, but they're not there yet.
Well, there's some buildings out there now. But the key to it is these are Ox buildings. These are buildings now really temporary, and the PDC agreement with this one housing deal is that could only be there for 1 year. So if you put them on the end of 1 year, they've got to be gone. But as we look at this, I'm also working on homeless veterans, and we may get up to 200 feet. The county is now writing and going to present tomorrow new legislation for their planning department to try to incorporate some of the new thinking for 200 feet and below square feet footprint. I think this is an area that I would like to see us getting into as long as we're talking about Ox buildings, because when you get into wintertime and people are really hurting, and particularly in my case, a vet dying because of the lack of shelter is something I don't want to see happen. And I'm hoping that somewhere along the line, when you guys are addressing this and you're thinking about this, that there's a lot of creative thinking going on. And I've been part of it, or too deep, I need snorkel sometime. But I would love to see you guys address this, because I know a bunch of the churches right now would like to have the ability to put temporary structures in their parking lots or on some of their properties. And we should come up with some type of thinking that where, and I've talked to Laura in the past about this, that we don't need to have a lot of SDC fees and a lot of things that take from nonprofits and from these efforts and eat up the money, where we just want to put roofs over the heads of people and help them in times of need. And so within this light is like to come up with some models, and that's what Portland State University's architectural department is doing, is to try to come up with some models that are adjudicated and reviewed and looked through and said, okay, we can let this go. And even one of the high schools is coming up with solar panel roofs and little battery packs so that they can be virtually off the grid. But this is Ox buildings. These are separate. These are being creative and looking into the future as to how and what do we do as society to address the needs of people on a temporary basis. And so shelters or transitional shelters, next comes semi-permanent housing, and all of these things can be done now very affordably, and you can actually go down like to Home Depot and see examples of some of these things that are really not that bad, but they haven't been approved by the city to allow somebody to actually sleep in them. So we need to think this out. Maybe this is not the case or the time, but it needs to be on your agenda in this temporary structure mindset where we get creative and think about saving lives.
Real quick, Paul, just to make sure, when you say Ox buildings, you mean auxiliary, not livestock.
Yeah.
Probably don't abbreviate.
Well, we
so.
do
Yeah.
have livestock in the section.
Yes.
So
But
but effectively, you're talking about tiny houses.
Yeah, tiny houses.
The quote tiny, because there's
Yeah.
a wide variety of
And
shapes.
Not the ones you buy from Home Depot, though.
And it's my understanding that the state's actually looking at
absolutely, the
passing some
legislature
legislation.
too. Yes.
So-
So this is something that everyone needs to get ahead of the curve on, and I tell you, it's important that we address it, have some understandings, because come November, October, November, there's going to be people out there making requests of you to be able to do this, and I could tell you 2 or 3 churches right now in Oregon City that would like to get this addressed immediately.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, I hope that we have an opportunity to discuss it, because what I have found extremely distasteful that the state has been doing as of late is that they just decide that you don't have any authority in your local government and they're going to tell us what we get to do. And I don't think that's right if we are a home rule city, and we should be able to decide what we need to do in our own community. So I think it's something we do need to think about. Appreciate it. Is there any other wonderful person that would like to come up and talk to us about accessory structures? Or have you heard it all and want us to just get on with it? I'm seeing nodding, yes, like get on. Okay. All right. Seeing no further people wanting to come up and testify, we will close the public hearing for Planning Commission deliberation.
Have you pondered what my...
Sure. Let me give it a shot. Okay, so as I understand it, in 1762-050-A23, we have regulations for various sizes of buildings, and all of those, subsection F or 5, exempts those uses from certain provisions in the code. And subsection C is supposed to mirror those same exemptions.
Mm-hmm.
And so government-owned properties are exempt, as are all the other uses from all sections of Chapter 1204, 1208, 1752, and 1762. 1762 are all the site plan standards. The bigger 1762 site plan, right? And except this section, right? You have to abide by this section.
Right. So they can only have buildings up for a certain amount of time.
Right. And the dimensional standards of the zoning designation. Right? That's what the government-owned property part is. So you could make this into two sentences.
And that's material.
And the material standards. So you could make this into two sentences if you wanted to. Government-owned properties are exempt from all of these sections.
Mm-hmm.
This section, meaning 1762-050-A23 and A21, which is the material standards, and the dimensional standards, the zoning section, remain applicable. So that would be another way to say the same thing.
I think that's
Except that, except A23 not only has size, but it has time. So you're not exempting the government from anything by putting this in here. There's no special benefit for the government. The parks can only have 3 consecutive days worth of tents, and the 30 consecutive. So
Well, but they are exempt from the dimensional standards. They are exempt from these 3 sections.
no, they're not.
They
It
are,
said-
and the dimensional
no,
standards
look,
of the
read.
zoning designation.
It says they are exempt from all sections, blah blah blah, to 62, except this section which says size and time, building materials, and dimensional standards. Because where except is, it says these 3 things they must comply with. And one of the things they have to comply with is the times and the amount of time they can have tents up.
Well, except for that the dimensional standards trigger the time.
But she wants to exempt them from that so that parks can
But
have
they're
a tent
exempt.
up every
No,
week.
I know. They're exempt from the dimensional standards, which in turn trigger the time.
No, they're not. Because except comes after the exemption.
Well, but
Is there anyone in the audience who's an English
if I
major?
say all right-handed people need to step to the left, to the west wall, except redheads, does that mean right-handed redheads do something else? Yes, it means they go someplace, they don't stand up on the wall. So,
How about this? We understand what you're trying to say.
yes.
You could always do a condition of approval to amend that language to state that.
I'm just,
but you don't
It's
you don't
grammar.
think
It's a grammar thing. It's
no, it's a legal thing.
Yeah, I know, but
And,
it's-
and I know about mays and shalls and accepts and exempts.
But that's why if you make it 2 sentences, didn't making it 2 sentences solve your concern?
No, because it still comes down to the government has to comply with A23. Is that correct? Is that your intent?
So, what I think an option would be was for the accept to say A23, A and B. You can narrow down the parts of A23, or except for A23C. It says D incorrectly. D could be a C. That means that section is applicable. and that
Then
A
the
and B
government
is
must comply
not.
with the section that covers the government. Then
Well,
it's a
that's where
useless-
that's
but
where we
see-
change it to this section where we said
But that's
this.
a useless statement to make. You have to comply with all the things we tell you you have to comply with. That's
No, because what we want to say is that this section is applicable. So finding words to say that this section is applicable, all the other sections that are not applicable for all the other sections aren't also not applicable for this. But that this section is applicable.
Because we have exempted all of the other sections.
I have no problem.
We can do a condition of approval though and get you where you need to be so it's not on the spot. And then I always hate writing code on the
Well,
dais.
but do you not see where I'm coming from? Do you not? I mean,
I totally
because
see where you're coming from.
because I'm not getting that from you based on your response. Because first off, I guess let's start with very basic. Do you want the government to be exempted from the time standards?
I think the answer is yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so the time standards are A23, correct?
That are
H-
triggered by a size requirement.
Correct. But the size requirement is in A23, correct?
Yes.
Do you want the government to be exempted from the size standard and time standard?
Yes, and we believe that exempt. Okay.
I'm step by step in this. It's just like what I do in arbitration. So you want the government to be exempted from the size and time standards, correct?
I believe
Yes.
that's true.
Then all you need to do is move A23 to before except, because you're exempting them from the requirements of A23.
And accepting them, yes. No, I totally get what you're saying.
Because
But we don't want to accept them from A23C.
you don't want them to be exempt from the section where they're exempt.
Yes, we want the exception that authorizes the exceptions to apply.
Okay?
It's very wordy.
Then in that case, then if you amend it to where it says D to C, then the government gets away with time and size, which the public does not. And they still have to comply with building materials and the size based on zoning, not on the thing. So they can't put a 5,000 square foot thing on a single residential property or whatever.
Well, I mean, it's only government.
I'm
owned
just
anyway.
using that as a blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. So, okay, so if you change the D to a C, I'm absolutely happy with what you've got then. Because 1762 is all except for this one sentence. If you change D to C, then I'm good. I understand completely what you're trying to do, and you understand what I was trying to do. So we're speaking the same language finally. Is that?
Believe me,
Could you explain that again?
lawsuits
Go
have
back
been
and listen to the
adjudicated
tape.
over letters.
Yeah. So
And it's a matter of where the word is placed in the
Yeah.
sentence as to what it means. And I totally got what he was
yeah.
saying.
So if you change D to C, I'm absolutely happy, and I'm more than willing to move forward with all changes as recommended with one edit.
Question. Carrie, are you satisfied with that?
I don't think she knew
I
what was
am.
going on.
Okay, then why don't we do it?
Let's just do it. You're changing the D to a C. Correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So do I need to read the whole thing and then?
Please don't.
Well, I just
No, I
want to
think
make.
we understand.
Yeah.
Well, I just didn't know for the
Damon,
record.
you've made your point.
Okay,
move it
tell you
forward.
what, read the last sentence.
No, don't need to.
No, just
So-
for the record, because the public is probably confused, so read C.
Public is.
Read, read C
you like me
the
to
way
read it
you
for you?
want it, okay?
So it should. I believe we're all agreed that 1762050 A23C.
No, I want you to read the whole sentence. Please read the sentence.
I am, but I have to make the proper reference. If I
Okay.
just say C, then nobody knows. A23C, government-owned properties are exempt from all sections of Chapter 12.4, 12.8, 1752, and 1762, except 1762-050 A23C, 1762-050 A21, and the dimensional standards of the zoning designation.
Okay. So move.
I want to make a point here.
It's-
Damon, I understand where you're coming from.
No, I totally got
But
it.
we sit here as a planning commission trying to weigh this against the pros and the cons. But what we've done here is done nothing but confuse the public.
The public doesn't need to be confused.
Well, exactly, the public doesn't need to be confused, but we're getting further and further away from simplify, which takes it away from the public, which bothers me. Because you need a Kentucky lawyer to figure out what in the heck is going on down at City Hall. Just go to the code. Yeah, bring your Kentucky lawyer with you.
Well, we'll
So
take
what
an
I'm
Oregon
trying to
anyway.
say is, we've got to get these things in terms where the general public can understand what the heck we're trying to achieve. Enough
Reading
said.
this, I couldn't understand. it as a
Sometimes the
public
way that a
member.
word is placed in a
To me,
sentence, if
this-
you put it in the
it's
wrong
confusing the
place,
whole
it
thing
means
to the
something
public.
completely different.
Well,
I assure you.
I understand that.
He
I'm
was-
just
he was
letting
just-
off a little steam
I
here.
understand. He was trying to make sure that it said what they wanted it to say and not, because
I have no objection with that.
Okay, all right, so who's moving that? Are you going to move that?
Yep. Move that we recommend to the city council the amendments to Oregon City Municipal
Don't
Code
repeat any of this stuff.
with the one amendment to section C,
Is there
as
a
proposed
second?
by the staff.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Maybe and seconded by Commissioner Guile.
Okay, I'll call the roll. Commissioner Guile,
Well, based on what I understand here, I can build my haunted house now on the property next to me, so I'll say aye.
Commissioner Maybe,
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney,
I'm going to abstain on this one.
Commissioner
Now, for a
Johnson,
vote. Aye.
F4.
Chair McGriff.
Aye.
Carries.
All right, let's review the minutes of November the 14th, 2016.
Could I just hop in here? The city commission meeting will be
Oh, sorry,
on
yes.
June 7th.
Okay, for the record,
City
that
Hall.
City Commission meeting June 7th. Thank you so much. We are done with that public hearing. Thank you for bearing with us. Words do matter. As I said, I've seen cases adjudicated for a comma.
No, don't leave us.
All right, so the minutes of November 14th, 2016.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, I would like to make an amendment. We have a little snafu in the minutes.
She
We
wants to
need,
move the word accept.
no, page 2, we have a question mark on somebody's name, and staff is going to look up the slips and get the person's name corrected. So I'd like you to say move
Oh, that
as
person,
amended
yes.
to make that correction.
Yes.
Oh, Charlie, yeah.
Yeah, otherwise Charlie becomes Mr. question mark, so we don't want that.
Okay, so move approval of the November 14th minutes as corrected for the person's name.
And I second it with the exception of, no.
Okay,
Sorry, just
question?
carrying that on.
Commissioner Guile,
Yeah, you
Aye.
weren't here yet.
Commissioner Maybe,
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson.
Abstain, I wasn't here.
Oh,
He was
abstain.
not on the commission at the time.
Sorry.
You didn't
And
watch it?
Chair McGriff.
Yes, I vote aye. I was not here at the meeting, but I did watch the tape,
Watch it for the heck of it.
and I have somewhere written down that person's name, so I vote aye. All right, the minutes of December the 12th,
I move to accept the minutes as they are
written.
written.
Okay,
I was going
I'll
to say
second it.
printed.
Second that. No problem. Commissioner Guile,
Aye.
Commissioner Maybe,
I was not here, but I will say aye in order to move the minutes forward. I did review them.
Commissioner Mahoney,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson. You're
Remember, he wasn't
abstaining.
here then.
Sorry. And Chair McGriff.
Aye. All right, so we have dispatch with that. While we're on this topic of minutes, I believe we received some communication about there was a citizen that was concerned about the fact that we were somewhat behind on our minutes, and you guys have taken care of this person's concerns?
We're working through them.
Perfect, okay. That sounds like a plan. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break while we get set up for the Natural Resources Committee and our friends and partners to have a work session.
Thanks.
I can't wait to start my construction of
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Is there audience?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm just not to single you out, but I'm just.
Yeah, no, go ahead and slide up there, Paul. I'd rather have you.
Oh, I
right
thought
up
that
on
was
a
Jerry
mic.
Herman.
I think there's a seat outside beyond the two doors.
Mike has a spot.
And at least he's got windows.
So is Jerry?
Yeah, we don't have
Does Jerry
that.
live in Oregon City? I thought he was in
Yeah.
Gladstone.
I don't know. We don't have. You don't have to.
Oh, don't you
don't
on this
have to.
committee?
No.
You know, plenty.
Are you there, my dear,
I
behind
thought you
the
did.
curtain?
Yeah.
Thumbs up.
Okay, because I can't see him.
I can.
Okay, good. All right, we're ready to go then.
All right, one-
Calling the meeting back into session, and this is our, for the wonderful audience, listening audience at home, we are going into a work session with our very own Natural Resources Committee. And Pete, why don't you give us the overview and the introduction about why we're here today?
Okay. So first of all, thank you all for attending, and just for the record, I'll mention that Matt Cool, Trent Warnes, and Doug Neely from the NRC are joining the meeting for the work session.
Yeah.
And I am going to briefly go through a presentation that Laura gave to the City Commission about these items that we're going to be discussing this evening, and this will be pretty informal. As part of the City Commission's consideration for future goals, the Natural Resources Committee decided that they have a couple of items of high importance that they want to discuss with them.
And did they?
Yes, and we can talk about what the feedback was. It was a busy meeting, but moving forward with other bodies as well.
Stream name, I don't know that.
And I beg your pardon?
Mr. Neal.
So briefly, the first request was with respect to stream signage at major roadways, which is a project that we're working on.
The state does that.
Yeah.
Go along, and there's
And,
little names for rivers and little creeks and so
This
forth.
would be a partnership with Greater Oregon City Watershed Council and NRC and Public Works. So I won't dwell too much on that. The request number 2, which is pertaining to what we're discussing this evening, is reevaluating the Natural Resources Overlay District map. So our Natural Resources Overlay District map is the overlay district that we use to protect what we call Goal 5 resources, which Goal 5 resources are cultural, historic, natural. When you look at State Goal 5, it's very broad. What the Natural Resource Overlay District does is specifically protect streams, wetlands, and habitat areas. And in 2010, the city adopted a new overlay that basically combined our stream and wetland and watershed protection overlays with our habitat overlay requirement into one overlay. So it protects what are called Title III and Title 13 resources under Metro Code. And we're a metro city, so we have to adopt an overlay that's in substantial compliance with Metro Code. And what you're seeing on the map here is what that overlay looks like as it comes into the city. It basically creates buffers around these resources that require protection, and the buffer areas consist of a regulated vegetative corridor width, which is intended to be a natural buffer from the stream or the wetland or the habitat itself. And when we adopted this overlay in 2010, there was substantial overlay between the Title III water quality overlay that we already had on the books and the Title 13 map that Metro said all cities must adopt this map or something close to it. And there was so much overlap between those overlays, we combined them into one. We combined the code into one for ease of administration. And essentially what it does with respect to water resources and wetlands is it regulates the vegetative corridor width next to the resource. So if you have a wetland edge or top of bank on a stream, that's the point of measurement where you start to add a buffer, which is anywhere from 15 feet all the way to 200 feet if you're next to a salmon-bearing stream like Abernathy.
Just so I understand.
Yeah.
Is that the pink areas that you're referring to on this?
Yeah, that's the pink
What's
areas.
the golden areas?
That's
not-
the
that's
golden
strange.
area.
That's the UGB.
Well, we got a highway
No,
over
I'm looking
here,
at
and
this
then we got the
golden here.
UGB.
Which one?
And then,
Right here, this
so,
gold.
anyway, we have some better maps as we move
Lemon
forward.
Falls Drive, it looks like, or 205, I don't know.
Okay.
Across.
So,
Just wanted to understand what you were talking
yeah,
about.
we don't regulate the wet part itself, the water itself. We regulate the vegetative corridor next to it. And we'll get into a little more. Oh, which one do I have? So this illustrates a little better with photograph what I was talking about. In this photo on the right, you've got an example of an urban subdivision being built. You have a road, you have a sidewalk, then you've got a vegetative corridor and a resource area that you're attempting to protect here. And this photo on the left, it's a fairly undeveloped situation, agricultural, but that's got a significant vegetative corridor, which is very grown up, and then you have a field next to it. And ideally, this vegetative corridor would be native species, not blackberries and invasives, but we do have a lot of that issue. So a lot of these vegetative corridors are in some range of condition, from degraded to good. And when development happens, it's incumbent on the developer to delineate the resource, and as a condition of approval of the development, to upgrade the condition of the vegetative corridor if they are impacting it. So we'll get into a little more about that. The overlay district was adopted. The map was adopted along with the code. Went through a legislative hearing process, 2010, and then it was adopted by the City Commission. This is an example of what the map looks like when you're applying it to, today. And you can see in this example, it's a very good example of where a stream corridor and the natural resources overlay district have been integral in planning the subdivision development and keeping it away from that resource. This is Silver Fox Parkway, and I don't remember the name of that subdivision, but there's a pretty extensive perennial stream and wetland complex that flows through here.
Well, it doesn't look like that was successful.
Yeah, because there's homes on it.
You're seeing lots which are, this was probably approved under the Old Water Resource Overlay District, which has a different boundary, and then there is a lot of situations where you're looking at the map and you're seeing building footprints underneath where the overlay is, and that's because the overlay was adopted after the development was done.
You guys
Yeah.
need to get with it and raise some money so we can reopen those corridors.
And one of the requirements for an application for development in or near one of these places is a much more detailed map that shows where you're going to be impacting a vegetative corridor, what your impact is in square footage, what's the condition of that corridor, and where you're going to be replanting within that corridor. So you have to mitigate the impacts of your development in a ratio. If you have 1,000 square feet of impact within a vegetative corridor, for example, you have to have 2,000 square feet of mitigation area and then replant that. Yep.
So, just using the subdivision
Oh, sorry.
as an example,
Yeah.
assuming that it's today's standards and this is a shadow plat, since the subdivision completely encompasses this vegetative corridor, and you say some of them are in terrible shape, would the developer be required to go in and remove blackberries and ivy as part of their development? So they'd have to have a crew come
Yes.
in
Yeah.
and brush whacking and pulling ivy off
Yeah.
of trees, and even though it's a mature area and it's done what it did for 50 years, okay. Do they have to remove mature non-native? Like if there's a Japanese maple in there, that's not native,
Right.
but it could be a mature tree,
Right.
and it could be providing
I think
benefit.
it's focusing on invasives, so principally trees over 6 inches diameter that are not invasive, hypothetically, are probably going to be allowed to stay and that sort of thing, as long as it's not a nuisance species or listed on a regional invasive list of some kind.
So you can't,
it's a
you
hypothetical
can't in his
situation.
little
Yeah.
landscape overlay put little circles and say Scotch broom because it's a nice flowering yellow plant.
not.
And say, okay.
Yeah.
The planting stuff would be the species.
Yeah, you need to make sure to speak
Right.
into the mic.
Yeah.
Otherwise, somebody behind the curtain will
So-
come out and hurt us.
So is that, under today's standards, they would not be able to have put those side of those homes on that pink area?
Well, they can encroach into the vegetative corridor to a certain extent, but there's a maximum setback in certain situations. It really depends. The general theory with respect to these type of ordinances and overlays is avoidance, minimization, and then mitigation. So avoidance, minimize, and then mitigate.
So what's to prevent these people,
Yeah.
which I'm sure they probably have done, I mean, I'm not accusing them of anything, but
Yeah.
they probably have an intermittent stream and flooding in their backyard, so they've gone and put French drains in and probably filled, and they could be doing all sorts of
Culverted.
stuff. Culverted, I mean, they could be doing any number of things.
So I did just want to clarify one thing. So the pink was bigger than the lots, and
Yeah.
that seems to be the area of confusion. So the overlay district is big. We add, from the features that we know of, we add extra as a buffer in case we're slightly off on measurements. And then also, when development occurs, they delineate where it is on
They
site.
delineate it.
And
Yeah.
so it doesn't match the pink or purple or whatever color that is. When you delineate it, they'll get the scientists on the ground in the field because the overlay district is such a broad thing. That triggers development to do a more boots on the ground, looking at the plants study to really figure out where it is on site. So
That's a good point.
it's okay that it doesn't match because they did
Yeah,
the study
no,
to
I
figure out.
understand.
Yeah.
But
We don't-
just
Because
for
you're
a
also-
clarification.
you're
Yeah,
drawing
so
on
the
a big
overlay
scale
may
map,
not
and then you
reflect
have to-
what prior delineations have.
Yeah.
So this is not necessarily a stream bed, it's just vegetated. But they wouldn't be able to build if there was a stream bed there. And that's
We didn't
what-
show the stream in here, but there is a stream.
I'm just wondering
somewhere.
if there's, okay.
Yeah, so we regulate the vegetation next to the stream, not the stream itself.
And then just to be clear about like the width of the corridors, is that measured from center of stream or from bank?
It's from the top of the bank or ordinary high water mark for the case of streams and rivers, and from the edge of a wetland for
Okay.
a wetland. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
the transition point is where is the measurement
Right.
site as opposed to some defined
Right.
center of a.
And you said, Pete, that we're not managing the water itself.
No.
Managing the corridor.
I mean, the
so-
intent,
Side of it.
the intent of the corridor is to protect the resource itself, through shading and that sort of thing, but we're not actively managing that water. So,
Right.
why are we talking about this?
Because
We
it's
have
important.
very important goals that need to be met at the state level that we implement at the local level, and those include Metro's Title 3 and 13, statewide Planning Goal 5, our comprehensive plan, Federal Clean Water Act, and something that's not very well known, but there was an analysis called the Metro Economic, Social, Environmental, and Energy Analysis, and basically that was an analysis that was tacked on to the Goal 5 resource when they looked at the areas within the urban growth boundary that they were going to manage and regulate as natural resources, and they said, well, there has to be some balance with areas that are allowed to be developed with residential areas within the urban growth boundary. And subsequently, when they applied this EC analysis, they allowed certain habitat areas to become basically non-regulated areas in order to accommodate the density that the urban growth boundary was intended to preserve and protect farmland and forest land outside the UGB. So that's what that is. Anyway, it protects watersheds, it protects the functions and habitats associated with watersheds and habitats, and it provides all these benefits: water quality and erosion control, sedimentation control, and it also provides predictability for the development community by having these maps adopted and having specific, clear, and objective standards in your code for how to mitigate any impact and stay away from the resource. In addition to that, scenic, recreational, educational values for significant natural resources. So our code and the old code and the new code basically adopted these overlays. The water quality resource area under the old code was slightly larger, but with better mapping. The natural resources overlay district was adopted. And then we encountered a situation where a site that was being investigated for potential development was found a wetland that was not within our overlay district. And our code is currently written so that if you find a wetland that's outside our overlay district and it doesn't touch our overlay district, even though it's a delineated wetland, it's subject to Corps of Engineers and Department of State Lands regulations, but the city is not going to apply the overlay district to that wetland and apply our vegetative corridor width.
Does
If
this
the
apply to?
wetland
Sorry.
touches the overlay district partially or wholly and it's changed, then our buffer goes around and applies to that newly discovered wetland in that situation, because we know wetlands change and they shrink
So
and
you're saying
expand.
basically if it's contiguous,
Contiguous.
it's in. If it's
Yeah.
not contiguous, it comes under a different
Right.
requirement.
What I was
And
gonna-
sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
What I was going to ask, you
Mhm.
said contiguous. Is this applied to only what's within Oregon City, or is this also in the UGB?
Well,
Does
we
that come
can't
into play?
regulate it until it's within the city, but we've mapped the NROD out to the urban growth boundary
Okay.
because the metro map actually went out that far as a Title III.
Sorry.
implementation.
That's what I was-
Yeah. No, that's fine.
I do have
Yeah.
to say on this particular example
Mhm.
that I'm surprised the subject site wasn't considered a wetland because that's the Kenema Waterworks site.
Yes.
So clearly there's water there.
Right.
When-
That's why they. That's why they.
Well, when
put
you
it
look
there.
back and you go through the history of what we adopted a local wetland inventory in 1999 that was based on updates to a 1985 inventory, and if there was no permission granted to go on site or that sort of thing, they had to make assumptions as to wetlands, where the wetlands were based on older data. And so it's rare that this type of thing comes up. Most of the wetlands are known and within the NROD.
Everybody in Kenema knew it.
But it does come up. Sorry. The second part of the Natural Resources Committee request was to consider amending the map to include a feature recently found. And the wetland was delineated, the Department of State Lands accepted the delineation, and the delineations are good for 5 years, according to the Department of State Lands. If it's not developed if the site's not developed in 5 years, and then they have to do another delineation. So,
And I
Go
will
ahead.
say that
when you have a delineation under Corps of Engineers methodology, and the Department of State Lands accepts that new delineation, they say that delineation stands for 5 years as being the record of the wetland, and if it's developed or somebody proposes something, it's based on that delineation. If it goes longer than 5 years, they'd have to do something.
What happens after that 5-year period?
I don't know.
They have to get a new.
We probably have to get a new
map.
delineation and
Yeah.
get approval.
Because that would make
Yeah.
sense because of stream wander and just topo effect. So
Yeah.
5 years almost seems a bit long. I know property out on Molall that lost 250 feet in the '96 flood.
Yeah.
The question is, at the end of 5 years, it gets delineated, I presume.
I don't
So that
know.
doesn't happen.
I don't know that happens, Doug.
Yeah.
I mean, it really would depend on whether there's development proposal or not,
Well,
or some
yeah,
sort of a.
the concern would be that it gets delisted because of the 5 years is up.
Yeah, that
Yes.
would
I
be
can-
my concern.
Yeah.
I can check.
our vegetated corridor around it though stays forever.
Forever.
It doesn't expire at 5 years. So,
Right.
and then presumably if they're going to do anything in the wetland, they'd have to check just like they would the first time around too. The one thing I would say is that I've been here 14 years. This is the first one feature that we found outside the overlay district. So it's rare. So we do feel confident in the overall.
Again, not talking to the locals because everybody in Kenema knows where the Kenema
Yeah.
water
I know.
works.
We're first
And
to
you-
admit
the
this is an
Metro-
error. This is an error.
and-
There's no doubt.
The Metro property was an interesting situation too,
They had a
because they
lot.
did all the trails and they did all the new delineations where those are. And some of them were changed completely, but they touched the existing overlays. So they just redrew the 50-foot buffers around the new wetlands and figured out there were impacts based on that. And so,
I know people
yeah.
have been telling us this for
Yeah.
50 plus years, but anyway, so let's, okay.
Okay. So
we're committed to
recap.
amending.
So
Currently, we are in compliance with Metro Title 3 and 13. We are, the code is written to accommodate changes in the resource, but it's also written to give some objectiveness and some clarity and to the development review process. If planning staff decides, based on your discussion and direction, to go through a process to amend the NROD to include this feature, we will do it as staff time allows and that sort of thing. It is a legislative process, and so, yeah.
We did commit to the city commission that we would amend it
Okay, well, let's do it.
when there's staff resources available to do so. But I think what Pete said was an important point, is that we're in compliance. And we
Yeah.
had a lot of conversation with Metro. What does this mean? We found this resource. Are we no longer in compliance? Do we have a certain amount of time to add the buffer around this? And the answer was, we're still in compliance. We'll always be in compliance, and we don't have a timeline, because we're not obligated to include our map, to include this, because our map complies.
We're not obligated to Metro, but we may be obligated to our community.
Oh, certainly, which is why we're committed to doing it. But I think that was a interesting legal response of, like, we are accredited for all intents and purposes, and we comply. And what does that mean when we find features just moving forward?
The property owners are aware of this?
They're the ones that had to do the delineation.
Yeah, what triggered the delineation was a stop work order by the city and by DSL. So,
the
yeah.
concern I have is we've got a delineation of this particular property. It clearly extends beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And do we have any way to complete that delineation? I mean, even if
Right.
it's just the property owner that's next to it, we want to,
So
finish the delineation, we're not gonna impact your property, it's grandfathered, but we wanna know the dimensions.
Okay.
Yep, I said it. I said the G word. Because there's a couple, there's at least two properties that are, there's almost a forced delineation that's gonna happen if they wanna do anything on their property. I think they'd want it done so they know what they can and can't do.
Yeah. So this gets into the larger issue of efficiency. The process of reevaluating the entire NROD,
Well,
maybe not be necessary. It could
But
be
you
an
have a new
isolated
thing, so I'd
update.
say that
Yeah.
that new thing should be fully bounded,
Yeah.
So we're not going to delineate someone's property, but we're going to apply an overlay district, which is broad, and that will require development within that overlay to delineate it as they develop or do
It's an
anything.
assessment
So-
from a big picture perspective. It's not going in and delineating using the core methodology.
So in other words, you paint your broad brush stroke using data that we have, and Pete can kind of talk about the resources that we have today that we didn't have in 1999 to help us figure out where the features are, and then we apply this buffer and we add 10 feet on the other side. So it ends up being bigger than the actual feature themselves. But we don't-
as you believe it to be in the other person's property beyond the delineation.
So we'll get there. We haven't done the delineation yet, but just recognize that we do a larger overlay district. We could, if we have reason to suspect all of Kenema, we could put it in an entire overlay district, right? So we can kind of look at the feature, we see this delineation, we see what you're seeing where it doesn't stop at that property line, and So we have the tools today to be better than we
Okay.
were back then.
Yeah, the LiDAR data, the contour data that the city has was pretty helpful in helping figure out where the streams actually were compared to the old Title III data that we had, because there were significant differences. And then when the legislative process was going on, we had a lot of input from Metro staff biologists on what they considered, why they considered habitat a good area for potential habitat. And they're really looking at some ecological information based on patch size and how big an area was probably going to remain undeveloped, and all these parameters that they put into their habitat conservation area map. And so that was part of it. And then the Title III and 13 maps that Metro had based on aerial photography. And their aerial photography that Metro, for Title 13 purposes, was a 2005 aerial photograph. And a lot of development happened in Oregon City between 2005 and 2009. So we had to go through and say these subdivisions and these developments had gone through the existing code and had permitting and are no longer the same as your resource maps show. But once that was done, they looked at that and the tree code, the street code. They looked at some of the stormwater requirements that the city had committed to updating and said, you are in substantial compliance with Metro Title 13. And that's how we ended up with the Natural Resources Overlay District.
So
Yeah.
to go back to
Yeah.
biology versus plantology.
Right.
If the person is now required to purge his corridor of berry brambles and ivy, is he not destroying habitat of native, because animals live in berry brambles that don't live in fern, areas, and I mean, what's the balance of,
Right.
oh, there's a raccoon population here and we'll destroy their habitat, versus these are 100% invasive species that need to go away and the raccoons can go too.
Mitigation plan.
Oh, I know that.
The mitigation plan
They come
that
back.
they provide, it has to be based on a report that by a specialist that they hire, who is going to recommend a mitigation approach. And there's more than one way to do it. It's not like you shall remove all invasives and then start over. They will recommend a combination of planting, invasive species removal, maybe not disturbing one area as much as another. And it's probably based on, how bad is the invasive problem? Is it 100% blackberries? Is it 20% blackberries? Can it be salvaged? But oftentimes, like Abernathy Chapel, for example, right next to the creek there, a lot of invasives and a fair amount of trees that were in bad shape had to be removed. So they ended up doing a pretty extensive removal before they replanted that. They had a couple of thousand square feet of planting directly adjacent to the creek, and then even more, maybe 4,000 square feet of planting higher up in the upland areas. So, but it's based on a report that they prepare that we have reviewed by our Natural Resource Overlay District specialist, which is David Evans and Associates. And they're the experts. We apply the code.
Okay, so
Yeah.
if a subdivision goes in next to me, I wouldn't necessarily expect all the ivy and all the blackberries to go away. There would be some sort of plan that I would have to look at
Yeah.
to know why
Right.
that patch got left and why.
Yeah. There's a separate part of the code that's not even part of the Natural Resources Overlay District that talks about just weeds. And you got to keep those down and keep them whacked and that sort of thing outside the overlay or within it. Yeah.
Like the 3.5 foot tall grass in the Walmart property?
Well, but I'll comment on that. I mean, the blackberries get established in disturbed areas. And once they're established, no matter what you do, they're going to come back. But the point is, the in order to produce a shade canopy, you have to get rid of that cover.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean the blackberries are not going to come back under the canopy, but one of the big concern, of course, is keeping shading on the water bodies.
Mhm. Yeah.
Getting it up. So, we've talked to a few consultants informally and, explored what it would cost to create certain portions of the local wetland inventory. And we've had a range of numbers, anywhere from 25,000 for an isolated area up to, 150,000 for the entire city, and that sort of thing. So that's the kind of variability we're looking at. Yeah. So we believe that the overlay district is based on relatively sound data. The book that we use with the inventories and the map that we have digitized is pretty accurate, and people have told us it's pretty accurate. I mean, specialists who are working on behalf of developers have said, that wetland is pretty close to where your guys' map says it is. You've got a few differences. As Laura mentioned, this is the first instance where we've encountered one outside of it. We don't know that there's a need to revise the overlay at this time, but it is necessary over time, and we would add as an update to the inventory a list of long-term projects, as long as our funding and staff capabilities are able to meet that. Laura, do you have anything to add on that, or?
Question I would ask,
Yeah.
Obviously you can look at this particular site when resources are available. What is the timeline on the particular site?
On the Kenema wetland?
Yes.
Yeah.
So in the planning division, we have 5 people, and 2 are pretty much on the legacy project and some other related things. And then, so that leaves us 2 planners and an assistant planner. And so the first primary is to write reports in the legal timelines that we're required to write our reports in. And so development, we're coming off we're on a bit of a peak, meaning we have, I think for funding, I have 150% of the expected fees already for this year, and it ends at the end of June. So we've been really busy, but it is a priority. It is definitely a priority for the city, and I think hopefully once this clears out, the dust settles, we can get there. But it's just a matter of having the staff capability to do it, because there's a lot. But we have done a lot of research to start to figure out what those steps are. But since we're just doing the overlay district, we don't think that it's...
Well, I appreciate the staff time. I guess the question I have, is there a mechanism of farming this out? I presume there are entities that can do a pretty good job at this kind of thing without necessarily having the great demands on staff. I understand we have to oversee it, but can this kind of thing be farmed out?
It could be. There's always the oversight part of it that can't be.
Yeah.
But what we wanted to do was to be really cognizant of our budgets. So this request was made a long time ago, but it is a priority for the city to make sure that we balance all of our budgets. And it was really, 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 really tight this year. And so I didn't put in extra money to farm things out when we had the capabilities to do them in-house, but it just might be a little bit slower, but we do have the expertise to do it, and it is a priority, so I would expect it, I don't know, before a year, but not after that, but who knows exactly when.
So it's something that we can keep communicating on and hopefully kind of, like I said, be informed and see when it actually gets done.
Yes, and we've said that to now City Commission, Planning Commission, NRC. We have put ourselves out there. You keep us in line. If we drop the ball, we promise not to, but we'll rely on this team around us to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But it is important to us. We do acknowledge its importance. With the one we also acknowledge that they submitted their historic review board application like back in December, so there's some vesting with that one, so might miss the boat there. But when they go to do something in the future, we'll look at the natural resource overlay district applying on the site then, and we'll look at it so that we get those neighboring properties before anything happens there. So there is a time frame. We do recognize the urgency to apply the overlay district before too much change happens.
Okay, well, before I call on Paul, I just want to say for the record that I contacted our staff, Pete Walter, to talk about what we might need to be discussing today at the meeting. And then I subsequently, after that, called Doug Neely. And obviously this was one of the things that I noted was, identification of additional wetlands, change the, so I wrote for my note myself was that we need to somehow amend the code to allow for sort of, I don't want to call it provisional, but if we don't have it on our stuff, that it automatically would fall under the core and DSL protections, including a fringe area until we get the additional information. And it seems to me that Kenema may not be the only thing out there, so I don't want to write the rule for the exception, but I'd rather have it be much broader to cover anything else that we might come up with in the future, so that we don't have these, what I would call orphan sites that come up and go, oh, well, we can protect this, but we can't protect that. So somehow or another getting the code to say that it would temporarily be covered until the delineation can be done.
Yeah. I assume that the DSL and core protections are there as soon as it's
They're already
delineated.
there.
Yeah, and so, of course, our broader concern, and you say a fringe area, and that's whether the possibility is there any kind of a holding thing that we can put on it until we have a chance to review it thoroughly.
You mentioned wetlands, but earlier on I wrote down protect upland habitats. Isn't that part of this as well?
Yep.
Well, it's not exactly part of this. I mean, the
No, not
buffers
part of
apply to
this.
wetlands.
Yeah.
Only the wetlands is what we're discussing, not the
Yes.
upland.
There are
Uplands are far more complicated.
There are
Yeah.
some upland habitat, that are within the NROD, but they show up. But most of them are associated with the stream corridors and ravines that are
Like the uplands that feed Abernathy Creek
right. Any of the gullies or tributaries that go into that
are not protected, or
No, they are. Yeah, but when I'm thinking upland without any stream on it that has a stand of trees that's like 150 feet or 200 feet away from any kind of stream corridor.
What about ones that are identified as part of Abernathy Creek, but they're not on any maps I've seen? But in some maps it shows Abernathy Creek as
Yeah.
one of the what do you call it, originating.
Yeah, well, I know Abernathy Creek is within the city limit, has got pretty much a corridor all the way through,
Yeah.
and it's a 200-footer, so it's
Just wondering.
yeah.
So back to the temporary thing, though, from my understanding, we need to have a map. We need to, the overlay district is implemented through a map. We can't, we went around this cycle, I think back in 2009, or one of the times that we were amending it is like, could we just say, or anything else we find, or any other map? And the answer was no. You have to adopt, you have to be clear about what you're adopting and exactly what you're regulating. You can't just say, if you find it, it applies. It's got to be on the map, and you have to have rationale to put it on the map.
That's true, for a variety of reasons, because of the map should be as comprehensive as you can make it, and it should be based on the most up-to-date information that you can find, but there are problems of getting owner access to property. You can adopt based on aerial photography and things like that, and LiDAR data, which we do, and any other data that is readily publicly available. But once you've adopted the map, that's your Goal 5 resource map, and that doesn't mean that you are not going to require a developer to redelineate the resource when they come in for an application. That's part of the process.
Do we only want to be looking at it from that standpoint, though?
No, I think you have to have a map because you have to have an idea of what the overall big picture is, and it's not just a regulatory overlay that the ideal situation is that you have a set of regulations, but you also have some ways to improve incentive-based ways to improve the corridor, and stormwater standards, and things like that are associated with that natural resources. So it's not just a toolbox with a bunch of code in it. It's intended to be a comprehensive overlay that really ties in a lot of your comprehensive plan regulations.
Of course, your overlay is never going to be as accurate as a developer's survey.
No, you require both.
Pardon me?
You adopt the map, but then you require the survey.
Yeah, and the survey is going to be different from the map that you've adopted.
Maybe.
Because it's going to be more correct.
Yeah.
Well, it's gonna probably be more correct.
Pardon?
As she mentioned, the overlay you have is big. It's a buffer that's intended
big,
to
yes.
catch far more than probably what your survey is going to take. So the survey is almost certainly to be more specific than the overlay.
Well,
because the
that's my
buffer's large.
point. That's my point. You might
Yeah.
have some contention there that, the city says, no, you can't
Well,
do this. And
frequently what happens is the city says, this is where the NROD boundary is on your map. You have a choice, developer, of accepting the city's overlay as is and doing your development outside of it. That's an option. Or you delineate the resource and figure out exactly where that corridor sits on your property from top of bank 50 feet. And then there are some situations where you have pre-existing lots of record, which I forgot to mention in this
Yes,
case, but
yeah.
this is a pre-existing lot of record situation in Kenema. And they have a right to develop a certain amount of that property. For a highly constrained lot of record, it's not a very big amount. It's only 3,500 square feet of a lot. And then the maximum setback you're not allowed to encroach is 25 feet.
Paul,
That
did you
goes on.
have something you wanted to?
Yes, thank you very
Add.
much. Inasmuch as that I often have represented Kenema in the Historic District, the National Register nomination document defined the location of this wetlands in the historic nomination document that went to the Department of Interior and is currently part of the record. So everything that's within Kenema has, within the boundary, has historic places status. And so when a stream or a wetland is identified, it is kind of documented and becomes a feature of national record. But within this, the key to this is here we have this wetland and we don't have a setback from it. And what I'm hearing, and I'm trying to get clear, there was a stream that ran from the wetland and it goes all the way down and connects to an NROD boundary. And within that boundary, it's contiguous, the stream that comes from it. And so would not NROD, because the stream comes right into the NROD boundary, then be connected as contiguous? Because it's a natural flowing, and it flows. It's not intermittent stream. It flows at a continuous level year round. And so what happened in this case, because of the wetlands and the problems there, swamps and stuff along the creek bed, some of the locals decided to dig the whole stream up and put a pipe in without permits and pipe the whole stream
Well, this was
all
back
the
in
way
the day.
down from the wetlands straight down to 4th Avenue into the contiguous NROD area. And they then got away, it went away.
Well, is this still in wooden pipes?
It is not in wooden pipes, it is now in plastic pipes. But the fact is that now we have a stream that's ran year round, that's in our national document, it's been put into a pipe, and so as to eliminate any need for setbacks from it. And then on top of that, somebody said, well, I want to have a level field back there So they took and put 10 feet of dirt over the top of the pipe, leveling off the whole area that has been identified in the historic document as a wetland.
Well, water goes where water wants to go.
And so when the water comes along, so we had a big flood about 15 years ago, and the water in this area got 15 feet deep. And it flooded basements around there. And so I remember going back to laughing about the Corps of Engineers definition of a high water mark. And the high water mark would be in the basements of some of these houses. And the pipe that they put in there is only an 8-inch pipe, I think. And so it couldn't handle the flow on a massive water conditions. So here we've got a case where we've obliterated everything. We got water flowing from year-round from this old historic Kenema Waterworks, and it flows down that bluff. And where you see where the pipes or the stuff there, that area along through there, the natural streams and the flow of water is a lot wider. That's right above where the written signatures is. If right in this area, right in that area above that, that's actually Fifth Avenue unimproved. That's Miller.
That's Miller.
Miller, and Fifth Avenue would be straight along that border right there. And this area has got a lot of contour to it, but when the water is coming down there, I've taken a shovel and I could go 150 feet of just digging down 6 inches and I'm in water. That whole ridge along through there. So when I get into that area of what it would be unimproved Fifth Avenue, it's huge and it's full of water. And water perks. We have one house down on 4th Avenue. So much water comes down. He's created like a percolating coffee pot, and the water comes into a pipe, goes down, and perks up like this, just out of natural flow, right next to the steps on 4th Avenue. And but this is true of all of the water percolating, and I've got it coming out. I've got a creek between my house and my garage on 5th Avenue, and that comes out of that right below the hill where the South End Road is breaking out.
Well, I mean, that's a good question. So if, like I said, everybody in Kenema probably knows it's there and has been there. So if it connects from one thing to the other, how do we accommodate that? It sounds like if it connects to the existing in-rod, it would take it all the way back up. It's just because somebody put it in a pipe doesn't, make it so. It sounds like it was not done with proper permits either.
I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either. I'm just throwing it out there.
When was it piped?
What?
Do you know what year it was piped?
The pipe was put in, I don't know exactly when, but it was never permitted. I asked John Lewis and
Was it
John.
5 years ago, 15 years ago,
John,
35 years ago?
I think it was whenever they could do it at midnight.
Was it before you moved in there?
Yeah, it was done before I moved in.
I was going
but-
to say it's got to have been when possibly Rick McClung was the Public Works Director.
Well, it was when no one was watching and they got tired.
So before the overlay district
Yeah,
was even
but
created.
before the, and I talked to Richard Craven about it, and Richard said, he said, I did a lot of the mapping, and he says, I would be willing to come back and help correct this. He's a great resource because he did most of this. And it's just something that was overlooked because Kenema was really not pressured.
Yeah.
Right, so it didn't put vegetated corridor around things that were piped and back.
Yeah, well, it seems to me there is
We did a lot of things to be piped before.
There is a point
permit
there.
or
I
not.
mean, it is identified in the National Register nomination because I looked it up and went back and looked at it. And we've pretty much adopted that. So somehow or another we have a little bit of a gap somewhere.
We are the first to admit that this is an error. I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, yeah. No, I'm not saying we did anything wrong. I'm saying
It's
an error,
not,
so.
but just because it's in the nomination doesn't mean that we can apply the overlay district. We don't have the legal authority to do that until we amend the overlay district, which we commit to doing. But yeah, there is.
Well, it's in one overlay district, it just needs to be in the other
Yeah.
overlay district.
It is unfortunate that it didn't make the natural resource overlay district, and I don't know why. And we
Well, I
hope
guess
to
the-
correct
The
it.
question I have is, if it takes a map to make it happen, we've got a map, we've got a new dot on the map, what's to keep, and you've got a surveyed dot on the map, not a guesstimated dot on the map. Why can't you just
Amend it.
just put all the lines around it and just submit that for an update?
Can. We would like to do it right. So,
Well, what's wrong about that?
No,
ignoring all the rest of what might be happening in the city, that's already been mapped. You've got a fix you need to fix. Why not just draw the circles and submit the map with that one change?
we can, but see how and you can see from the delineation that it probably goes on to other properties, so we need to do more work. So one is that I understand how it sounds, but we have two planners and one assistant planner, and one of them has been here less than 6 months, and the other one less than a year. So anyway, we have a lot of current planning that needs to happen, and we need to process those current planning applications within legal deadlines. And so today, that is the priority. It is busy today. We have done some preliminary research to figure out what the next steps are to adopt this. So we're moving in that direction towards adoption. We don't want to just put a buffer around this property and call it good, because we can see that it probably goes on to the neighboring property. So there's a little bit more to figure out how broad that brush stroke needs to be. So it's going to be more complicated than just submitting a legislative application. We would want to talk with property owners and make sure that people are aware. It's a little more time consuming than just submitting an application.
But when you drew the original map, how much talking did you do and how much drawing of buffers did you do and saying, here it is, comment, and it's going forward, so you'll have your chance to comment to the planning commission and the city commission, and we're going to adopt it, and
They walked on, in 99 study, you could see there's maps of them actually going on the ground to validate where things are at. Now we have to do tools like LiDAR and things like that, but we just need to make sure that we get those consultants or whatever it is, or our GIS department.
What do you need to go on the
It
ground?
is done for this property, so we
Right.
could put a 50-foot buffer around this property, but that would still leave the adjacent property out
And-
there,
and
or
if they say we're
any
not gonna
feature.
let you in,
They don't. Then we have tools like LiDAR to.
So we can do it that way.
We can get to the right-of-way portion along the back, so we can kind of look from afar, but we could use other tools today that we have, such as LiDAR, that we didn't have in the past, but that all takes time. And I acknowledge this should have had a buffer around it, and there is
Yeah, I
a
mean-
sense of urgency to address it, but we're just trying to meet our legal timelines at the moment. And I understand how that sounds.
I
But
understand completely.
We're
It's
trying
just-
to train our
I'm
employees to
just-
do staff
I
reports
just-
right and that kind of thing, and so it's
just-
got to fit in.
I've seen analysis paralysis happen, and it seems like you've got a specific location. You
Mm-hmm.
throw the buffer around it, and at the very least triggers those other properties from to some basic protection, and also triggers them having to do their own delineations.
Maybe not all the properties that need to, because it's just an overlay district. So if that feature extends out, if we only do 50 foot from this node, then we're probably missing the next guy down the line, like 2 properties away. But we could do that. I just don't have the staff time to even do that right now.
Okay.
So where are you going to try to slip this in the work program?
As soon as we get a break in applications.
Well, that may never happen. I know how that goes. Been there, done that.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it is a priority, but I can't give you a date because there is one thing that we can't control in planning, and that's the amount of applications that we have and the time in which we have to review them. And I tell you, lately, we've just been really busy with really complex applications, and that is not an excuse. It is just acknowledging that we only have 3 people, 2 planners and assistant planner, and we're working on a lot of stuff, and there's only so many hours in the day. So we're working on it. It is a priority. Soon, we've already started down that pathway of doing research and figuring out, do we have to amend Metro maps? And the answer is no. And so there has been a lot of legwork done thus far, but we will try not to do analysis paralysis.
Oh, I think basically what people are just, I know, because as soon as you say some date, everybody will try to hold you to that, to hold your feet to the fire. But I think what I am hearing is that people want some kind of a, even if it's a WAG, some kind of a guesstimate of, well, how soon do we think this is going to happen? And, you know, is it going to be resulting in unintended consequences? Is the damage already, you know, done?
What's a WAG?
Well, that's.
I can't really
Well,
say it
that's
all on the record, but he's saying it, so anyway, that's what a WAG is.
For this property, they're already in review, right?
Yeah.
So this property, the damage was done before, when we figured it out, the damage was
Well,
done,
they've
right?
done
We
this,
didn't know, and
so.
Yeah.
now we know, and the second we knew, it was too late.
Okay, so NRC, so what,
Well, they didn't
what
drive
else would
through
you
the
like to have
wetland
done?
once they delineated it. It's protected now.
Yeah.
The wetland is
It's
still
protected,
protected.
But
Or
we
you
need,
could have a
That's the
setback
thing, is
from it.
we're only talking
Yeah,
about
that's
the
what we're talking
vegetated corridor
Right.
adjacent.
Right,
The
so we need the buffer.
features, which we do not regulate, are always protected.
so what else would you guys like? I think you hear agreement that we need to get this done like yesterday.
The notion is the establishment of the buffer. It may not be a perfect establishment, but the point is, somebody wants to do develop there, they're going to go through the same kind of surveys
Right.
as you do otherwise.
Right.
And if the buffer was too big, that would come out in the survey.
Right.
So I think, I don't know if that's exactly what Damon was saying, but it does sound a little bit like it. The buffer is not something that's set in concrete, it's something that awaits a request for development to come in and then a survey to be done.
And I've got a little different take on that, because I can see where you're coming from, is like you want a defendable process that, like, if the questions do come down and the other, like, well, why did you guys just slip it in and not follow your normal procedures? I mean, I've done a lot of permitting for natural resource stuff before, and if you don't dot all the T's and all the I's, people start picking it apart.
Yep.
I can understand that, so. I like that. It's unfortunate. I would love to just say, yeah, plug it in, but at the same time, you guys need to be able to do your workflows to be, there's no questions, ifs, ands, or buts about it. I think this is a quandary.
Yeah, I mean, we could put a 60-foot buffer around this known feature and call it a day, but I think you're missing other features if you do that.
Which
Well, I think
actually
Yeah,
gets me
50 foot and
to
then
the
10
other
foot.
work would still
question I
be
have
done.
is, what is the status of seasonal or artisanal springs?
intermittent streams.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, basically.
It's just a spring. It doesn't like run anywhere except into the curb and out into the street. I'm like, for instance, the property across the canyon for me lost 35 feet of yard because of the spring that used to be there, but when he was leveling his yard, he capped it, and then finally there was enough rain and it blew the cap and he lost. And there's a couple more up, and I'm up by the hospital. There's a couple more where people have sump pumps in their yard to suck the groundwater out so that their yard isn't always muddy.
It's
So,
a smart place too.
It's important to think about the interaction of the storm drainage system with the natural resources system. And whenever we're looking at these sort of things, we turn the storm layer on and we can see where the inlets are and the grates are. And that's why the scientific reports are so important, because they're going to talk about what the vegetation is, what the groundwater conditions are, but that's not the same as a stormwater report.
Yeah.
You know, which is looking at the underlying soil and what the water's doing to it from a structural standpoint and drainage perspective. So those are separate analysis, and yeah, there's systems that are linked together frequently, you know, oftentimes overlapping. But until it's in the NROD, Natural Resource Overlay District, it's not going to be protected unless, you know, you'll have drainage protections under your stormwater standards, which are going to hopefully deal with that. Yeah.
I want to, before this breaks up, one other issue is I would love to be able to make sure that people realize here is a Department of Geology LiDAR mapping of Oregon City, and all the little circles in red are landslides identified by LiDAR. And there's 2 big circles right around Kenema, where so I can take you right to South End Road, and I can take you right to Fifth Avenue, and you can see it on the LiDAR map here. And there's circles around the whole area, including up on South End Road. And all of this area is in the definition of Dogami as having the highest susceptibility to both shallow and deep landslides. And we're in the process right now of approving building permits on these slopes, and some of them, including one in front of my house, is over 35% grade. And they want to cut away the toe of the landslide to put a driveway in. And we believe that in Kenema, this is very dangerous because Kenema slides. And anybody that cuts away the toe of a landslide, and you throw a little water and maybe the big one, and my house will be down on McLaughlin.
Hey, waterfront.
Yeah, well, it's a faster walk.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would like to keep it right where it was built in 1880. It would be nice. All I'm saying is that I went to Dr. Burns at Dogami. He was nice enough to send us a new mapping. So he said, Paul, my maps that I've had and I've tried to present are older, but the new ones are better and more updated. But we need to be able to do something and have these approval process that are now type 2 going through planning or through engineering. They need to be publicly reviewed. We don't ever know what's happening, and these things we know. Here's a case like you're talking about maps. I got a map here and I can point right out and show the map shows the exact area that is by LiDAR and that shows that it's virtually all of Kenema. And these 2 circles, and you can take a look at them. So we know what it is. The map shows us what they are, but we're allowing process to go ahead. We approved them through HRB, and now the people say, oh, the HRB approved these plans. I can go ahead and build on that steep slope. And I went down there and I've checked pipes from other developments along, like the stormwater pipes are from the gutters. And the pipes have moved away, and the piping comes down from the roof and flows right out onto a 35% slope because the pipe is moved down the hill, because the soil is moving down the hill. And so that's all over these areas through here. And we're still going right down the line saying, well, the geotech guy comes in. So Dr. Burns told me, he said today, he says the key to it is making sure that these geotech firms, you get a second and third opinion, but that they're adequately bonded and insured. I said, because if I have a big rock in front of my house and it was exposed during one landslide, and if that rock is maybe 2 or 3 tons, and if it goes down on the trajectory, it's going to go through probably 3 or 4 houses before it hits the Willamette River. If anybody's in those houses, it's going to kill the people, and it's going to do a lot of damage. It may not damage my house, But there is no landslide insurance that's available in the United States, except for Lloyd's of London. And anything else that's written isn't worth anything. So we have a process like in Kenema where we'll take a house through HRB first, and then somebody comes back and says, now, how about all of the environmental conditions? Let's say a wetlands or a creek or a setback or something like that. Those are never considered during the HRB process. In reality, in some of these areas, the environmental side and the permitting side should go first before we take it to HRB.
Chair
preaching to the
McGriff,
choir.
may I
yes, so,
respond?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything to respond to. I think it's
Well,
just...
no.
it's-
There's
it's as a
misinformation
comment.
that I would love to clear up. So we do have a geologic hazards overlay district. That's true, and it was built. It's been amended a lot over the years, and it does include all the Dogami information. So the really good information that is out there, we love, and we have included it within our overlay district. So one thing is, when property gets to be developed, sometimes there's lots of processes that apply to property as it develops. And the city doesn't say, you do this process first, then this process next. We just say, you go through all the processes, and if one process amends the other process, you got to go back. So you should think really carefully about how you apply. We don't tell you the order of operations. You can kind of figure that out on your own. And so when properties go through, for example, historic review board review, an applicant says, I want to put a house here, and this is what I want it to look like, and here's where I want to do the driveway and the landscaping, that kind of thing. And that's what they review. And it's on their risk if they change that design. So if they then go through a separate geologic hazards process, which is a public review, so the type 2 is a public review process. Geologic hazards, we very much want to do a good job when it comes to hillside and landslide protections. So we regulate all properties of a 25% slope or greater and a 50-foot buffer around those, and all properties with historic landslides using these LIDAR data, and a buffer of 200 feet around those. So we want to know if we're cutting away the toe of a slope or things like that, even if it's not on the sloped property themselves. And so it's similar to this overlay district, right? You're in the geologic hazards overlay district, and that means you do a study. So then you as an applicant, you hire a consultant to do a study. So whether it's an NROD study or a geologic hazard study, you get your specialist, who is normally with some, well, no, not normally. They are with an accreditation for geologic hazards. It's an engineer, so a stamped engineer license. You turn it in the city, and then we get a second pair of eyes to look at it through a public review process. So it's all done through a public review process. But it's true, we don't do the order of operations. We just say you do development at your own risk, and you have to meet all the criteria. If you don't meet one, you're not approved, right? And if one process changes something else, it's up to you, and you have to go back and change the other one. So you can do a lot of our approvals are dependent on them. So let's see. Are there any questions about the overlay district? All public process, all on updated information, all very transparent, all on our website. We're here to serve.
Well, you and I have had this conversation. I totally agree. I think if you're in a geohazard, if you were in some sort of an overlay that requires you to do a report, I think from a property owner standpoint, it is much smarter to find out that information before you spend a whole bunch of money on plans that you may never be able to use, because it doesn't matter if the HRB approved it. If the geotech stuff doesn't come out, they're expensive. I would do it first. I would put my least cost option first. And it seems to me that it makes a lot of sense, both staff time and from the standpoint of the development, that they would do that. And there's got to be a way that we need to strongly encourage or say that this is what you're going to do first before you do that.
Yeah, we don't require, but we do a pre-app, and the pre-app includes all of this stuff all together. So If it's in the geologic hazards, we require pre-app, even if it's for a single-family home. It's basically developer, bring your geotech, city, bring your geotech, and they'll talk geotech, see if the right geotech. And then at the same meeting, we'll talk about the natural resource overlay district and any other design standards or processes. So we do look at them initially with the pre-app in a comprehensive way, but we don't require an order of operations. We just say you have to meet all the standards, and it's your risk.
You,
It'd be nice.
do you have a list of geotechs that they operate from that's acceptable to the city, if they choose their own geotech?
They can choose their own geotech, but they have to have accreditations and all that.
I'm just going back
Uh-huh.
to the
Public
new
Works.
developments, so where all the geotechs where the developers said, yes, you can do it.
Yeah, but now we have better data. So
Yeah, but
then,
our geotech didn't.
I know that, I know. It was
That's
an
scary.
issue, and nor did the planning commission approve it.
Yes.
the city has no intention to have anything like that ever happen again, right? We really want to be diligent. We were all sort of on the same, we all have the same feeling here, right? We want to do a good job. We want to do a good job today to get it right. But, so yes, they have an accredited special person doing whatever study it is, whatever geologic hazards or natural resource, and then we have a secondary eye look at that, and then it gets vetted through a public process. So,
I just want to say, just real quick, I really like your signs idea. I mean, we've got a waterfall coming down that has, where's the water, what creek is it, what is it, and we've got, a major bridge by, the Kruger lumber site going over a major waterway, and it's just water. I mean, what is it? Where'd it come from?
And the thing, and those are the streams you see.
Yeah.
There's a
What
lot of
about the
streams
ones
that
we
people
don't?
say we don't
Yeah.
know they're there. They're there, but they don't see them.
Right,
So
yeah.
we're hitting them all.
Yeah, no, it's,
Except the one that you talked about, that waterfall, you're talking about the one I'm thinking.
Yes.
That's actually a county road, and
Yeah.
we're going to work with the county on that.
well, yeah, I'm talking about the one that comes down next to the steps.
Yeah. There's one off
The
of
one that we-
205.
the one
It'd be
that we
nice to
lit.
know where that waterfall comes from, right by West Lynn.
Yeah.
That's coming from someplace.
Yeah.
But,
And it's full.
but yeah,
all the
that's, I
time.
mean, it doesn't, it's a major attraction, and we don't even have a name on it. It's just
Yeah, we're just-
water that we shine lights on.
Yeah, we're just hoping to bring some kind of spotlight on it and kind of
Yeah.
bring it to people's attention.
And it's simple,
So we're
'cause
all
we have
losing
own
our
sign.
attention span here. So what else can we do for you guys?
No, this is great. First of all, I appreciated when I went in with the report at the end of the year and brought up this particular issue, that planning commission, their report came right back afterwards, supporting.
Yeah.
what-
Well, it's our report too now, so
Yeah,
we're
I understand that, and I
Strength in numbers.
appreciate the commitment of the planning commission.
strength in numbers. All right. Is there any good of the order other than June 3rd? Be there or be square.
And June 13th?
What's June 3rd?
June 3rd is the legacy.
That's
kickoff.
because I'm emceeing Rose Festival.
Yes, I know you are. You're
That's why we
emceeing Rose
scheduled it that
Festival.
day.
We know you're not going to be there.
She also scheduled that day.
I thought it was something else had come up. for
No,
June
not-
3rd.
And then
Well, everything's
the
coming up.
Work session is the 12th or 13th?
whatever the Tuesday is.
Second Tuesday.
What's this work session?
Okay.
Yeah.
And that will debrief from the June 3rd event if you can't make it to the June 3rd event.
Bump.
Okay.
Whack that gavel.
Whack it. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Paul, can I see that map?